He didn't lower his voice. He didn't pull me aside. He stood at the head of a mahogany table worth more than my yearly salary, lifted a crystal glass of Chateau Margaux and said, clearly, proudly, so every relative, business partner, and Global Business Review journalist could hear, "I'm proud of all my children, except the failure sitting at this table." The room laughed. My brother applauded. My stepmother smiled like she'd been waiting 27 years for that exact moment. But I didn't cry. Instead, I stood up, walked toward my father, and placed a plain white envelope on his plate. "For you, Dad. Happy Father's Day." Then I turned around and walked out. When he opened that envelope, his scream echoed through the entire mansion. And if the story resonates with you, and let me take you back 2 months earlier, to the day Aunt Carmen handed me a small wooden box my mother had kept hidden for 27 years. The Rojas family estate sits on acres of land in San Aurelio, California. 4 stories of Georgian-style architecture, wrought iron gates, a long driveway lined with imported Italian cypress trees. Modern Estates Journal featured it twice. Global Business Review called it understated elegance. I called it a prison with excellent landscaping. My father, Fernando Rojas, loves to say he built his real estate empire from nothing. That's the version he repeats at charity galas. The truth is messier, tangled up in my mother's family land and connections he prefers not to mention. But that's a story for later. Growing up, I learned very quickly where I ranked in the Rojas hierarchy. At the top was Mateo, my older brother, 35, groomed since birth to inherit the throne. He drives a Porsche 911 Turbo S and has never worn the same tie twice. My father's golden child, his mirror image. Below him was Elena, my younger half-sister, 27, my stepmother's daughter. She held a marketing title at Rojas Development Group, a position she earned simply by existing. She posted her Hermes bags on Instagram and called it personal branding. And then there was me, Lucia, the public school teacher, the one who drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, the one who bought dresses from discount racks, the one who chose helping kids over chasing money, which, in Rojas language, translated to total and unforgivable failure. Every time I visited the estate, I parked my car around the corner, behind the gardener's shed. No one ever told me to. But the one time I pulled into the circular driveway, Mateo laughed so hard he nearly choked on his espresso. "Did you Uber here in that thing?" he'd asked. "Or is it a rental? Please tell me it's a rental." It wasn't a rental. It was the only thing I owned outright, and I was proud of it. But in that house, pride meant nothing unless it came with a price tag. The invitation arrived 3 weeks before Father's Day. Not by mail, by video call. Isabel, my stepmother, appeared on screen wearing a cream Chanel jacket and her signature Cartier love bracelet, the one my father gave her on their 10th anniversary. Her smile was flawless, rehearsed, the kind of smile that made you feel like you were being evaluated, not invited. "Lucia, darling," she said softly, "I hope I'm not interrupting your work." The pause before the word work was deliberate. It always was. "Not at all," I said evenly. "What's going on?" "Well," she replied, smoothing an invisible wrinkle. "As you know, your father is receiving Businessman of the Year from the California Business Council. We're hosting a celebration at the estate, very intimate, just family and a few close associates." She paused, letting intimate hang in the air. "Naturally, we need you there." Need, not want. "The press will be attending," she continued. "Global Business Review is sending a photographer. It's important we present a unified family front." Ah, there it was. I wasn't being invited because they missed me. I was being summoned because an empty chair would raise questions. Lucia Rojas, the absent daughter. That would be the headline. Lucia Rojas, standing quietly in the background while her father accepted another trophy. Set dressing. Nothing more. "Of course," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I'll be there." "Wonderful." Her smile widened, but her eyes stayed cold. "Oh, and Lucia, do try to dress appropriately. Your father's reputation is on the line." The call ended before I could respond. I stared at my phone for a long moment, thinking about all the other times she'd reminded me to dress appropriately, to speak appropriately, to exist appropriately. She wasn't inviting me to a celebration, she was summoning me to perform. I should explain why I kept going back. When I was 10 years old, I won first place in my school's essay contest. The topic was my hero. I wrote about my mother, about how she used to read to me every night, how she smelled like jasmine and old books, how she told me I was her greatest gift. My mother had been dead for 5 years by then, but writing about her made her feel close again. I ran home clutching that certificate like it was made of gold. My father was in his study, reviewing contracts. I burst through the door, breathless. "Dad, I won. First place in the whole school." He didn't look up from his laptop. "Writing," he said flatly. "And how much money does writing make, Lucia?" The certificate wilted in my hands. "I don't know. I just thought—" "Mateo," he called out, "scored 2 goals in his soccer match today. That's the kind of achievement that matters. Teamwork, competition, winning." Mateo appeared in the doorway, 13 years old, already wearing the smirk he'd perfect over the next 2 decades. "Yeah, little sis," he said. "Maybe stick to cheering from the sidelines." That night, I tore up my certificate and cried myself to sleep, but I remember one thing clearly. My grandmother, Fernando's mother, found me afterward. She was the only warm presence in that cold house. She pulled me into her arms and whispered something I didn't understand at the time. "You look so much like your mother, sweetheart. So much like Rosa." She said it like a secret, like a prayer. I didn't know then why those words carried so much weight. I do now, because if the Rojas family estate was a prison, then Aunt Carmen's little cottage in Sonoma County was its exact opposite. Aunt Carmen Alvarez was my mother's younger sister, the only living connection I had to Rosa Alvarez, the woman who gave birth to me and died when I was 5. While the Rojas family lived in marble and mahogany, Carmen lived in a small farmhouse tucked among maple trees, surrounded by towers of secondhand books. She'd been a librarian for 30 years. Her idea of luxury was a new reading lamp. I loved her fiercely. Every year, without fail, Carmen sent me a handwritten birthday card. Not a text, not an email. A real card, pressed flowers from her garden taped inside, and words that made me feel seen. "Happy birthday to my favorite niece. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you're becoming." She was the only person who ever said my mother's name out loud. We spoke on the phone every few weeks, me venting about school administrators, her recommending obscure novels I'd never heard of. Our conversations were easy, uncomplicated, nothing like the verbal minefields of Rojas family dinners. But there was always something Carmen held back. A hesitation in her voice whenever I mentioned Fernando. A careful sidestep when I asked about my mother's past. One day she said gently, "When you're ready, I have something to show you, something Rosa wanted you to have." "Ready for what?" I asked. "You'll know." I never pushed. Carmen wasn't the kind of person who kept secrets without a reason. And part of me, if I'm honest, was afraid of what I might find. That fear was about to become irrelevant. Because 2 months before Father's Day, I drove up to Sonoma County for spring break, and Carmen finally decided I was ready. But before I tell you what she gave me, you need to understand the Friday dinners. Every week, without exception, the Rojas family gathered around a 20-seat oak table imported from some chateau in France. Waterford crystal, tall candles, wine that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. It should have felt elegant. Instead, it felt like a performance review. The ritual never changed. Fernando sat at the head of the table, slowly swirling his wine, like a judge preparing to deliver verdicts. Isabel perched beside him, perfect posture, perfect smile, monitoring everyone's behavior like a hawk dressed in couture. And then the questioning would begin. "Mateo," Fernando said at the last dinner before my trip to Sonoma County, "tell me about the Aurelia contract." Mateo straightened, practically glowing. "Closed it yesterday, 5.2 million. They tried to lowball us, but I held firm." "That's my boy," Fernando lifted his glass. "To Mateo." "To Mateo," the table echoed. Then he turned. "Elena, how's the rebrand coming along?" "Ahead of schedule." Elena flipped her hair. The new campaign launches next month. Marketing Weekly wants to feature us. Excellent. Fernando raised his glass again. To Elena. To Elena. And then, silence. Fernando's gaze slid toward me. Lucia, he said, my name sounding like an obligation. Anything to report? I set my fork down carefully. Actually, yes. One of my students, a girl from a really difficult home, just got accepted to San Mateo University on a full scholarship. I've been tutoring her for 2 years. I waited for something. A nod. A polite acknowledgement. Instead, Mateo snorted. And what do you get out of that? He said. A gift card? Fernando didn't even smile. So, he said flatly, nothing that benefits this family, as usual. Isabel reached over and patted his arm. Don't be too hard on her, dear. Some people just aren't built for success. I gripped my napkin beneath the table and said nothing. Because that's what I'd been trained to do. After dinner, I excused myself to use the restroom, the guest bathroom on the first floor, of course. Isabel had made it very clear years ago that family bathrooms were reserved for actual family. I was walking past the conservatory when I heard her voice. Isabel was on the phone, her back to the doorway. She hadn't noticed me. Honestly, Patricia, it's exhausting, she said with a soft laugh, pretending to tolerate her every week. A pause. Another laugh. No, she doesn't suspect anything. She's too desperate for her daddy's approval to see what's right in front of her face. I froze. The plan is simple, Isabel continued. Fernando's been itching to cut her off completely. He just needs a public reason, something that makes her look like the problem. My heart started pounding in my ears. Once she embarrasses herself badly enough, Isabel said calmly, she'll leave on her own. No messy confrontation, no inheritance disputes. Just gone. The Father's Day event is perfect, Isabel said softly. All those people watching, all that pressure. I barely breathed. If Fernando pushes hard enough, she continued, calm and precise, she'll crack, and then we'll finally be rid of her. My heart slammed against my ribs. I pressed my back to the wall, barely breathing, and then a floorboard creaked beneath my foot. Isabel spun around. Our eyes met. For a split second, something flickered across her face. Alarm, calculation, recovery. Then she smiled, smooth as silk. Patricia, I'll call you back, she said lightly, tucking her phone away. She turned to me. Lucia, I didn't hear you there. I was just discussing a staffing issue at the company. It sounded serious, I managed. Nothing you need to worry about. Her smile sharpened. Run along now. I'm sure you have papers to grade, or whatever it is you do. She brushed past me, leaving behind a trail of Chanel No. 5 and something far more poisonous. I stood in that hallway for a long time, her words echoing in my skull. They weren't just dismissing me. They were planning my removal. The drive to Sonoma County took 4 hours, but it felt much longer. Isabel's voice played on a loop in my mind. Once she embarrasses herself badly enough, she'll leave on her own. Was that what 32 years had been building toward? A public humiliation, carefully staged, designed to make me disappear. By the time I pulled into Aunt Carmen's gravel driveway, the sun was sinking behind the hills. Her cottage glowed warm and golden, smoke curling gently from the chimney. She was waiting on the porch with 2 cups of tea. You look like you've been carrying something heavy, she said, pulling me into a hug. You have no idea. That evening we sat by the fireplace, surrounded by books and the smell of wood smoke. I told her everything. The Friday dinners, Isabel's phone call, the constant feeling of being an outsider in my own family. When I finished, Carmen was quiet for a long moment. Lucia, she said finally, her voice steady but soft. There's something I need to show you. She stood and crossed the room to an old cedar chest in the corner, one I'd seen 100 times but never questioned. She lifted the lid and took out a small wooden box, weathered with age, carved with delicate flowers. This belonged to your mother. My breath caught. Rosa gave it to me before she died, Carmen continued, her voice thick with emotion. She made me promise to keep it safe, Aunt Carmen said quietly. To give it to you when you were ready. Ready for what? I asked. Carmen pressed the box into my hands. For the truth. Inside were photographs of my mother as a young woman, radiant, laughing, alive in a way I'd never known her to be. Beneath them rested a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and fragile, and at the very bottom, a sealed envelope. It was addressed in my mother's handwriting. For Lucia, when she's strong enough. I don't know what's inside, Carmen said softly. Rosa never told me, but she was insistent. She said, one day you'll need it. I held the envelope with shaking hands, its weight settling in my chest like a stone. 27 years of secrets, sealed in paper and silence. I wasn't sure I was ready, but I was beginning to understand that readiness might not be optional. I didn't open the envelope that night, I couldn't. Instead, I placed it back in the box and drove home to San Mateo, the box riding in my passenger seat like a ticking bomb, at every red light, every stretch of traffic. I glanced at it and wondered what my mother had been so desperate to tell me, but life, of course, intervened. The week before Father's Day, Isabel scheduled a family video call to coordinate logistics for the celebration. What that really meant was making sure everyone looked flawless for the cameras. Fernando's face filled my laptop screen, stern and assessing, like a judge preparing a verdict. Isabel hovered just behind him. Elena waved from her corner of the screen, and Mateo smirked from what looked like his corner office. The photographer from Global Business Review arrives at 6, Fernando announced. Everyone should be dressed by 5:30. This is a black tie event. I expect you all to represent this family appropriately. His eyes shifted, straight to me. Lucia, he said. That means you especially. No, teacher clothes. I know how to dress myself, I said evenly. Father. Do you? Mateo cut in. I can send you something from Neiman Marcus. My treat. Consider it charity. He laughed at his own joke. No one else did. That won't be necessary, I said, my jaw tight. Fernando, Isabel added sweetly, perhaps you could give Lucia a clothing allowance just this once. We wouldn't want any unfortunate photos circulating. No, I said, cutting her off before Fernando could respond. I'll handle my own wardrobe, thank you. Fernando let out a long, familiar sigh, the kind he'd perfected over decades of disappointment. You've always been stubborn, he said, just like your mother. The words landed differently this time. Just like your mother. He'd said it 1,000 times before. I'd always assumed it was an insult, his way of calling me difficult, emotional, impractical. But sitting there with my mother's unopened envelope waiting at home, I heard something else beneath it, something that sounded almost like fear. That night, I dreamed of my mother. Not the hazy impressions I usually carried, the jasmine perfume, the soft voice reading bedtime stories. This was different. This was sharp, clear, a memory surfacing after decades of burial. I was 4 years old. My mother and I were in my bedroom, the one with the yellow curtains she'd sewn herself. She stood behind me, brushing my hair, counting each stroke the way she always did. 98, 99, 100. There, she whispered. My beautiful girl. She wrapped her arms around me, and together we looked at our reflection in the mirror. Her dark hair beside my lighter brown, her warm eyes beside my blue-gray ones. Mama, I asked softly, why do I look different from Daddy? She went still, just for a moment. Because you look like me, sweetheart, she said finally. And that's a good thing. Does Daddy think it's a good thing? She didn't answer right away. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, stronger, fiercer. Listen to me, Lucia, she said. You are my greatest gift. No matter what anyone says, no matter what anyone does, you are loved, you are wanted, you are enough. She held me closer. And your daddy will learn, she said quietly. I'll make sure of it. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. We both looked up. Fernando stood in the doorway, watching us with an expression I was too young to understand. My mother met his gaze. She didn't flinch. She's our daughter, she said firmly. Ours. Fernando said nothing. He simply turned and walked away. 1 year later, my mother was dead. A car accident on a rainy night. The police said she lost control on a curve. I was 5 years old when they buried her. 27 years later, I woke up in my San Mateo apartment with tears on my face and a realization settling deep into my bones. My mother had been protecting me from something. And whatever it was, she'd carried it to her grave. Until now. The day of the Father's Day celebration arrived with weather so perfect it felt like a cosmic joke. Blue skies, 72 degrees, not a cloud in sight. The Rojas family estate had been transformed into something straight out of a magazine spread. White tents dotted the back lawn. A jazz quartet played beneath the pergola. Staff in crisp white uniforms moved through the crowd with silver trays of champagne and delicate canapes. Flowers were everywhere, roses, peonies, orchids. Isabel's signature touch, designed to remind everyone that elegance could be purchased by the truckload. I arrived at exactly 5:30, as instructed. I wore a simple black dress I'd found at a discount store, 60% off. It wasn't designer. It wasn't remarkable, but it fit well, and more importantly, it was mine. Isabel intercepted me at the door. "Oh, Lucia," she said, her eyes sweeping over me with surgical precision. "You actually came." "Was there doubt?" I asked evenly. "One never knows with you," she replied, adjusting my collar as if I were a child. "At least you made an effort. Try to stay in the background during photos, won't you? The lighting is better for certain complexions." I bit back a response and stepped inside. The grand dining room had been set for 50 guests. The mahogany table, normally oppressive, now stretched the length of the room, draped in white linen and anchored by towering floral centerpieces. Place cards written in careful calligraphy, Waterford crystal at every setting. A Steinway grand piano sat in the corner, waiting for the hired performer. And at the head of the table, a throne-like chair reserved for the guest of honor, Fernando Rojas, Businessman of the Year. I found my place card near the far end, between a distant cousin I barely recognized and an empty chair reserved for late arrivals. As far from Fernando as possible. Some things never changed. By 7 o'clock, all 50 seats were filled. I recognized most of the faces. Aunts, uncles, cousins twice removed. The Rojas family tree was vast and complicated, held together less by affection than by a shared investment in Fernando's success. They came for the free champagne, for the networking. Love was optional. Mixed among them were Fernando's business associates, men in tailored suits, women in designer gowns, laughing just a little too loudly at his jokes. And in the corner, a photographer from Global Business Review, documenting every smile for the inevitable puff piece that would call Fernando a visionary. The evening unfolded like a carefully rehearsed performance. Appetizers, toasts, anecdotes about Fernando's early struggles, stories that conveniently omitted my mother's family money. Isabel played the gracious hostess, gliding between tables with effortless precision. Mateo held court near the bar. Elena posed for the photographer as if auditioning for a magazine cover, and I stayed in my corner, speaking only when spoken to. Then came the main event. Fernando rose from his chair, crystal glass in hand, and the room fell silent. He wore a charcoal suit cut perfectly to his frame, a Patek Philippe gleaming at his wrist. His silver hair was immaculate, his smile camera-ready. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who had never been told no. "This award means a great deal to me, not just professionally, but because of the people who made it possible." He gestured toward Isabel, "My beautiful wife, who stands by me through everything." Applause. "My son, Mateo, who will carry on the Rojas legacy." More applause. Mateo lifted his glass. "My daughter, Elena, who brings grace and ambition to everything she does." Elena beamed. Isabel dabbed at imaginary tears. "And of course," Fernando paused. His gaze moved slowly across the room until it landed on me. "I'm proud of all my children." Another pause, longer this time. "Except the loser sitting at this table." The words dropped like a bomb. For one heartbeat, the room froze. Then someone laughed. Then another. Mateo began applauding. Slow, deliberate. "About time you said it, Dad." Isabel pressed her lips together, barely hiding her smile. 50 pairs of eyes turned toward me, and somewhere deep inside, something went very, very quiet. I didn't cry. I know that's what they expected. What they wanted. Lucia, the sensitive one. Lucia, the emotional one. Lucia, who would flee in tears and prove, once and for all, that she didn't belong. But something inside me had shifted. Maybe it was my mother's letter, still unopened in my purse. Maybe it was Isabel's voice from weeks earlier echoing in my head. She'll leave on her own. Or maybe it was 32 years of swallowed insults finally reaching critical mass. Whatever it was, I didn't cry. Instead, I stood. The laughter faded. The room fell silent again, this time confused. I wasn't following the script. Slowly, deliberately, I walked toward the head of the table. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step measured. The photographer from Global Business Review lifted his camera, sensing something worth capturing. Fernando watched me approach, his smirk faltering just slightly. "What are you doing?" he asked. I didn't answer. I reached into my purse and took out a white envelope, plain, unremarkable, yet heavy with everything I'd uncovered over the past 2 months. I placed it gently on his plate, beside his untouched dessert. "For you, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "Happy Father's Day." Fernando stared at the envelope as if it might bite him. "What is this?" he demanded. "One of your sentimental cards," I replied calmly. "Open it and see." Isabel leaned forward. "Fernando, don't engage with her theatrics." "Open it," I said. Our eyes locked. For the first time in my life, I didn't look away first. Something crossed his face. Uncertainty. Maybe even fear. But I didn't stay to watch. I turned and walked toward the door. The 50 guests parted instinctively, too stunned to speak. "Lucia!" Fernando's voice cracked. "Get back here. You don't walk away from me." I paused at the threshold. I didn't turn around. I just did. And then I was gone. Now, let me take you back 3 weeks. After that video call, the one where Fernando told me not to dress like a teacher, I finally found the courage to open my mother's envelope. I sat on the floor of my apartment, the wooden box beside me, Aunt Carmen's words echoing in my head. For the truth. My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside were 2 documents and a letter written in my mother's handwriting. I read the letter first. "My dearest Lucia, if you're reading this, I'm no longer there to protect you. And I am so sorry. There's something I should have told you while I was alive. But I was too afraid. Afraid of losing you. Afraid of what Fernando would do. The truth is this. Fernando Rojas is not your biological father. Before I met him, I was in love with someone else, a man named Daniel Morales. He was kind, gentle. He loved me completely. We were going to be married. Daniel died in an accident 2 months before our wedding. I discovered I was pregnant with you shortly after. My family was devastated. A child out of wedlock would have destroyed our reputation. And when Fernando proposed, he needed our family's land for his developments. My parents saw a solution. Fernando agreed to marry me and to legally adopt you in exchange for the property rights. It was a business transaction. He promised he would treat you as his own. He lied. I spent every day of our marriage watching him resent you simply for existing. I tried, Lucia. God, I tried. But he was too powerful, and I was too weak. I'm enclosing your adoption certificate, proof that you are not Fernando's biological daughter. Keep it safe. One day, you may need it. Know this. You were created from love, real love. Daniel would have adored you, and I love you more than my own life. You are not a mistake. You are my miracle. Forever yours, Mama. I sat there for over an hour. the letter pressed to my chest. Tears streamed down my face. Not tears of grief, but tears of release. For 32 years, I had tried to earn the love of a man who had never intended to give it. Now I understood why. The letter was one thing, legal proof was another. The next morning, I called Lucas Bennett, my closest colleague at school. We'd been friends for 3 years, the kind who showed up with coffee when you were grading papers at midnight, who listened without judgment, who never once made me feel like a failure. I need your help, I told him. And I need you to keep this confidential, I added. Anything. I told Lucas everything. My mother's letter, the adoption certificate, 27 years of unexplained coldness from a man I'd spent my entire life trying to impress. Lucas didn't hesitate. What do you need? A DNA test, I said, to confirm it. Getting Fernando's sample was easier than I expected. At one of the Friday dinners, he'd left his jacket draped over a chair. Before I left, I pulled a few hairs from the collar, strands with the follicles still attached. Legally, it was a gray area. Ethically, I was past caring. The testing facility, Accugene Diagnostics, was AABB accredited, the gold standard for paternity testing. Results in 2 weeks. 14 days felt like 14 years. When the email finally arrived, I was alone in my classroom after hours, surrounded by stacks of student essays. My hands shook as I opened the PDF. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. Conclusion. The alleged father is excluded as the biological parent. 0%. No doubt. No margin. No possibility. I sat there in the empty classroom, fluorescent lights humming overhead, and started to laugh. All those years, all that desperate striving, all the moments I'd thought, if I just try harder, he'll finally love me. He was never going to love me. Not because I wasn't good enough, but because I was never his to love. Lucas found me still sitting there an hour later, the test results printed and clutched in my hands. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I looked up at him, eyes wet, and smiled for the first time in weeks. "I'm better than I've been in 32 years. That night, alone in my apartment, I finally let myself fall apart. I sat on my bedroom floor with my mother's photograph in my hands, the one from Aunt Carmen's box. Rosa, laughing in a summer dress, her whole life stretched out in front of her. She couldn't have been more than 23. "You knew," I whispered to her image. "You knew he would never accept me, and you tried to protect me anyway." For the first time, I understood the sadness I'd always sensed beneath her smiles. The way she held me just a little too tight. The fierce, almost desperate way she told me I was loved. She knew her time was running out, and she was trying to give me enough love to last a lifetime. That night, I cried for her. For the life she should have had with Daniel Morales. For the marriage she'd been trapped in with a man who resented her child. For the accident that took her too soon, leaving me defenseless. But somewhere inside the grief, something else surfaced. Freedom. For 32 years, I had carried Fernando's rejection like a weight around my neck. I believed his coldness was my fault, that if I'd been smarter, more successful, more like Mateo, maybe he would have loved me. The truth was simpler and far more brutal. I was never going to win a game I didn't know I was playing. I looked down at the adoption papers, the DNA results, my mother's letter. This wasn't about revenge. I didn't want Fernando's money. I didn't want his approval. I just wanted to stop pretending. I wanted the truth spoken out loud, in the same room where I'd been humiliated for decades. And I wanted to walk away, not as a failure fleeing in shame, but as a woman who finally understood her own worth. "I don't owe them anything," I said aloud to the empty room. And for the first time, I believed it. If you're still here, maybe you know this feeling. That moment when you realize you've spent your whole life chasing someone's approval, and they were never going to give it. Not because you weren't good enough, but because they decided you weren't worthy before you ever had a chance to prove yourself. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family? Someone who made you feel like you would never measure up? Drop a comment and tell me your story. And if you want to know what happened when my father opened that envelope, keep watching, because his scream could be heard through the entire house. But before I confronted Fernando, I needed one more piece of confirmation. Aunt Carmen gave me a name. Samuel Ortega, she said over the phone. He was the attorney who handled your mother's affairs and the adoption paperwork. If anyone can explain what those documents really mean, it's him. Samuel Ortega was 72, retired for 5 years, living in a modest colonial home in Palo Alto. When I called and told him who I was, he went quiet for a long moment. "Rosa's daughter," he said finally, his voice heavy with something that sounded like regret. "I've been waiting for this call for a long time." We met in his home office, surrounded by shelves of leather-bound law books and framed photos of grandchildren. He moved slowly, but his mind was sharp as ever. I laid everything out, the adoption certificate, the DNA results, my mother's letter. He read each document carefully. Then he removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "It's all legitimate," he said. "I drafted that adoption agreement myself 32 years ago. Fernando signed it in my office." "So he knew from the beginning," I said quietly. "He knew before the wedding." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Your mother was completely upfront about her pregnancy," he said. "She even offered to release him from the engagement, but Fernando saw an opportunity." He paused. "Your family's land was worth millions. He agreed to marry her and legally adopt you in exchange for the property rights on the condition that he would raise you as his own." Samuel shook his head. "I watched over the years," he continued. "I saw how he treated you at family events, how your mother would call me in tears, asking if there was any legal recourse. There wasn't. She was trapped," he said quietly. "And so was I. I let the truth settle." "If it ever came to that," I asked, "would you be willing to confirm this?" Samuel met my eyes. "I'm 72 years old, Miss Rojas," he said. "I'm not afraid of Fernando anymore. I should have spoken up decades ago." He reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. "Your mother would be very proud of you." The week before Father's Day, Lucas came over to help me prepare. Not prepare for revenge. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't planning an elaborate takedown. I wasn't trying to destroy Fernando's business. I didn't want his money. I didn't want to ruin his family. I just wanted to stop lying. "So what's the plan?" Lucas asked, spreading the documents across my kitchen table. I looked down at the evidence, the DNA results, a copy of the adoption certificate, and a letter I'd written myself. Short, direct, no accusations, just facts. "Dad, I am not your biological daughter. You've known this since before I was born. Mom's letter explains everything, and the DNA test confirms it. Thank you for providing a roof over my head for 18 years. But I don't owe you gratitude for treating me like a burden I never asked to be. I'm not seeking your money or your inheritance. I release any claim to the Rojas estate. I just want you to know that I know, and that I'm done pretending." Lucia Lucas read the letter twice. "That's it?" he asked quietly. "No, you're a monster? No rot in hell?" I shook my head. "That's not who I want to be." I took the letter back and folded it carefully. "He spent 32 years trying to make me feel small," I said. "If I stoop to his level, he wins. But if I walk away with my dignity intact, knowing the truth, that's something he can never take from me." Lucas was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, soft and sad. "You know they'll never forgive you for this." "They never forgave me for being born," I said. I slid the documents into a white envelope. "At least now," I added, "they'll have an actual reason." I sealed the envelope and wrote on the front, "For Dad. No return address, no room for reconciliation. Just the truth, finally spoken." The night before the party, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible outcome. Fernando opening the envelope in private, Fernando opening it in public, Fernando throwing it away without reading it at all. But I kept coming back to the same realization. It didn't matter. My peace was no longer dependent on his reaction. I got out of bed and walked to my dresser, where my mother's photograph sat beside a small vase of jasmine, her favorite flower. I'd started buying it every week, a quiet ritual that made me feel close to her. "Hey, Mama," I whispered to the photo. "Tomorrow's the day." Silence, of course, but I could almost hear her voice, the way she used to speak to me before bed. "You are enough, sweetheart, exactly as you are." I thought about everything she'd sacrificed, marrying a man she didn't love to protect her child, spending years in a cold, joyless marriage, watching helplessly as Fernando aimed his resentment at an innocent girl, dying before she could see her daughter grow up. She deserved better than Fernando Rojas. And so did I. I picked up the envelope from my nightstand and felt its weight in my hands. "If he's cruel tomorrow, and he probably will be, it won't hurt anymore," I said softly. "Because I know the truth now. I know who I am, and it has nothing to do with him." The jasmine on my dresser swayed gently in the breeze from the open window. I slipped the envelope into my purse, climbed back into bed, and, for the first time in weeks, slept deeply. No dreams, no rehearsed arguments. When I woke the next morning, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Ready, not for battle, not for revenge, just ready to be free. Now, let me take you back to the dining room, to the moment after I walked out. Fernando sat frozen at the head of the table, the white envelope resting on his plate like a dare. "What the hell was that about?" someone asked. Mateo laughed nervously, trying to break the tension. "Classic Lucia, always so dramatic." But Fernando wasn't laughing. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he reached for the envelope. Isabel leaned over his shoulder, curiosity overtaking her usual composure. "It's probably nothing," she said lightly. "Some passive-aggressive thank you note." Fernando tore the envelope open. The first page slid out. The DNA test results. His eyes moved across the document, and according to a cousin seated nearby, all the color drained from his face in about 3 seconds. "Fernando?" Isabel's voice sharpened. "What is it?" He didn't answer. His hands were shaking as he pulled out the second document. The adoption certificate. His signature, dated 32 years ago. Then came the third page, my letter. He read it in silence, his jaw tightening with every line. And then, according to that same cousin, Fernando Rojas, the unshakable patriarch, the self-made billionaire, the man who had never shown a crack of vulnerability in his life, screamed, "No, no, no, no!" The crystal glass of Chateau Margaux shattered against the table. Red wine spilled across the white linen like blood. "Fernando, what is happening?" Isabel snatched the papers from his hands, her eyes racing over the text. "DNA results. Probability of paternity, 0%?" she read aloud. "What is this?" her voice carried. In a room full of gossips, that was all it took. The whispers began instantly. DNA test, 0%. Lucia isn't his daughter. Fernando was gripping the edge of the table like a drowning man, mumbling the same words over and over. "This can't be right, this can't be right." The photographer from Global Business Review was capturing everything. And somewhere out in the parking lot, I was sliding into my Honda Civic, hands steady on the wheel, my heart pounding with something that wasn't quite triumph. It was relief. For all her calculation, Isabel made one fatal mistake in that moment. She panicked, out loud. "Adoption certificate," she said, still staring at the papers, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. "Fernando, you adopted Lucia? She's not your biological child?" 50 guests heard every word. To her credit, Isabel realized what she'd done almost instantly, but it was already too late. The truth spread through the room like wildfire. Did she just say Lucia isn't his daughter? He adopted her and treated her like garbage for years? If she wasn't even his child, why was he so cruel? Fernando finally found his voice. "Everyone, this is a private family matter." Private? Teresa Rojas, Fernando's older sister, a formidable woman in her 70s who had never liked Isabel, rose slowly from her seat. You just called that girl a loser in front of everyone, she said coldly. And now we find out she isn't even your daughter. And this is private? Teresa, sit down. I will not sit down. Her voice could have cut glass. Rosa was like a daughter to me, Teresa continued. I watched how you treated her child after she died. We all did. We just didn't have proof it was deliberate. The room erupted. Cousins whispered furiously. Business associates exchanged tight, uncomfortable glances. I later learned the Global Business Review photographer was already texting his editor. Fernando. One of his business partners, Victor Lin, stood up, clearly shaken. I think perhaps I should be going. Don't be ridiculous, Fernando snapped. I invited you here to celebrate my award, not to witness. He gestured vaguely at the chaos. Whatever this is. Victor Lin shook his head. I'll call you next week. He left. 2 other associates followed. Mateo was on his feet now, trying to contain the damage. Everyone, please. My father is clearly upset. Let's all just take a breath. Not now, Isabel snapped, her voice icy. Mateo kept talking. Isabel kept snapping. And Fernando kept clutching the adoption papers as if they might burst into flames if he held them tightly enough. Meanwhile, the truth kept spreading, and there was nothing any of them could do to stop it. What happened next, I pieced together later from Aunt Teresa's account. The room descended into chaos, controlled chaos. The kind that happens at wealthy gatherings where no one raises their voice, but everyone is absolutely furious. And at the center of it all stood Teresa Rojas, commanding the room the way only a 73-year-old matriarch can. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. Teresa's voice cut cleanly through the murmurs. Fernando, you married Rosa knowing she was pregnant with another man's child. You legally adopted Lucia, and then you spent 30 years punishing that little girl for circumstances completely beyond her control. Teresa, you don't know what you're talking about, Fernando snapped. I know exactly what I'm talking about. She stepped closer to him. I was at your wedding. I watched Rosa's face when she said her vows. She wasn't in love with you, Fernando. She was terrified, and now I finally understand why. Another cousin spoke up. Samuel, who had always idolized Fernando. Is this true? He asked quietly. You knew from the beginning? This is none of your business. It became our business, Samuel shot back, his voice suddenly cold. When you made your announcement tonight, we all laughed. I laughed at a woman who never did anything to deserve it. The shift in the room was unmistakable. These weren't outsiders judging Fernando. They were family. People who had witnessed years of subtle cruelty and explained it away. People who were now realizing they had been complicit. You made all of us part of your vendetta, Teresa continued. Every joke at Lucia's expense, every dismissive comment. You trained us to look down on her, and we did because we trusted you. Fernando's face flushed from pale to mottled red. I gave that girl everything, he snarled. Everything except basic human decency, Teresa replied. The silence that followed was suffocating. And somewhere across town, I was pulling into my apartment parking lot, finally able to breathe. According to Teresa, the most devastating moments came next, from Fernando's own children. Mateo was the first to crack. He'd been pacing behind his father, trying to manage the situation, when the full weight of the truth finally hit him. He stopped mid-step, staring at the adoption papers still clenched in Fernando's shaking hand. Wait. His voice sounded hollow. Wait. Mateo. Fernando reached for him. You knew? Mateo stepped back. My whole life, you told me Lucia was a disappointment, that she wasn't living up to the Rojas name, that I had to work harder because she was dragging us down. Son. But she was never a Rojas, Mateo said, his voice breaking. She was just a kid you agreed to raise for a land deal, and you made me hate her for it. I didn't make you. You did. Mateo's composure finally shattered. Every time I mocked her, you laughed. Every time I excluded her, you approved. I thought I was being a good son, but I was just a weapon. Elena was crying now, mascara streaking down her carefully contoured face. Mom! She turned to Isabel. Did you know about this? Isabel said nothing. Her silence was answer enough. You told me Lucia was jealous of us, Elena whispered. That she hated me because I had what she wanted. Her voice cracked. But she never wanted anything, except to belong. Elena, darling, it's more complicated than— No, it's not. Elena pulled away from Isabel's outstretched hand. It's really not complicated at all. You're horrible people, she swallowed hard. And you raised me to be horrible too. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. Where are you going? Isabel called after her. To find my sister. The door slammed shut. The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the ice melting in the abandoned champagne glasses. But Teresa wasn't finished. I later learned she'd been waiting decades for this moment. Not out of malice, but out of guilt. She'd known Rosa, loved her like a sister. And she'd watched helplessly as Fernando slowly crushed the light out of her. Since we're laying bare family secrets, Teresa said, her voice carrying across the devastated room, let me add one more. Fernando's head snapped up. Don't, Teresa said sharply. Don't try to stop me. Rosa didn't die in an accident. The room went completely still. She lost control of her car on a rainy night, Teresa continued. That part is true. But does anyone here know why she was driving at midnight, in the middle of a storm? She turned to Fernando. You told her you were going to send Lucia away, to boarding school. You said you couldn't stand looking at another man's child anymore. A collective gasp rippled through the room. She was driving to her sister's house, to Carmen Alvarez, to beg her to take Lucia in. She was going to leave you. You don't know that, Fernando said weakly. I know because she called me that night, Teresa said, her voice trembling. She was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. Teresa wiped her eyes. She said, Teresa, he's going to take my baby away. I can't let him. I'd rather die than let him hurt her anymore. The silence was unbearable. And then her car went off the road. Teresa lifted her chin. She didn't lose control, Fernando. She lost hope. Fernando looked like he'd been struck. Rosa spent 8 years in a loveless marriage protecting a daughter you never wanted. She was 29 when she died. And the last words she ever said, to anyone, were about keeping Lucia safe. That's not, Fernando stammered. That's not fair. Fair? Teresa's voice rose for the first time. You want to talk about fair? That little girl grew up motherless in a house full of people who resented her existence. You don't get to talk about fair. Fernando opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time in his life, Fernando Rojas had nothing to say. According to Teresa, the aftermath was devastating. Mateo, who had modeled his entire life after his father, looked like a man watching his identity collapse. He sank into a chair, head in his hands. I called her a charity case, he whispered. At Thanksgiving, 3 years ago. His voice cracked. I said, at least we know one person at this table didn't earn their place here. Everyone laughed. He looked up, tears streaming. She just smiled, like she was used to it. He swallowed hard. She was used to it, because I did it all the time, because you made me think it was okay. Fernando said nothing. I'm 35 years old, Mateo continued, voice breaking, and I've been a bully my entire adult life, to my own sister, who wasn't even technically my sister, who never did anything to me except exist. Mateo, you couldn't have known, Fernando said weakly. I didn't want to know, Mateo shot back. I didn't ask questions because the answers might have made me uncomfortable. He stood abruptly. That's not ignorance, Dad. That's cowardice. He turned to Isabel, who stood frozen. And you orchestrated this. You told me Lucia was beneath us. You coached me on exactly what to say to make her feel small. I was protecting this family, Isabel said tightly. You were protecting your inheritance, Mateo snapped. This was never about family. This was about money. He looked at his father one last time. I don't know who I am anymore, he said quietly. But I know I don't want to be you. Mateo walked out. And for the first time anyone could remember, Fernando Rojas looked truly alone. Fernando made one final attempt to regain control. He straightened his jacket, smoothed his silver hair, and summoned the authority that had built a real estate empire. "Everyone," he said firmly, "this is a private family matter. I appreciate your concern, but I must ask you to respect our privacy." No one moved. Then a voice came through the speakerphone his assistant had left on the table. "Fernando." It was Victor Lin. "I'm withdrawing from the Aurelia Tower project. My attorneys will contact yours on Monday." "Victor, be reasonable. I just watched you call your own daughter a loser in front of 50 people, Victor replied. "Then I learned you've been psychologically abusing her for 30 years. What exactly is reasonable about continuing to do business with you?" The line went dead. 2 more phones buzzed. Emails, texts, the dominoes were falling. The reporter from Global Business Review stepped forward, visibly uncomfortable. "My editor just asked me to pivot the article," he said. "We'll be reaching out for comment before publication." Fernando's face went gray. "Get out," he whispered. "All of you, get out of my house." The guests slowly dispersed, not like people leaving a celebration, but like witnesses to a catastrophe. At the door, Teresa turned back one last time. "Rosa deserved better," she said quietly. "And so did Lucia." Then she was gone. Fernando Rojas stood alone, surrounded by shattered glass, spilled wine, and the ruins of a reputation built on lies. Sitting here now, I understand something important. I didn't destroy my father. I didn't take his money or ruin his empire. I just told the truth. And the truth did the rest. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and speaking up, I see you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop pretending. While the Rojas estate imploded, I drove home in silence. No radio, no podcasts, just the hum of the engine and my own breathing. Texts flooded in. From Fernando, from Mateo, from Isabel. I deleted them all. Then a message from Carmen Alvarez. "Teresa called me. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart." That one. I saved. Inside my apartment, I picked up my mother's photograph. "It's over, Mama," I whispered. "I'm free." A week later, the consequences became real. Global Business Review never mentioned Fernando's award. Instead, it ran a piece titled, "The Rojas family's carefully constructed image shatters at Father's Day celebration." The $70 million Aurelia Tower project collapsed. Partners withdrew. Isabel filed for legal separation. Mateo resigned as COO, writing only, "I need to learn who I am when I'm not trying to be my father." And me? I went back to work. I graded papers, helped students apply to college, ate lunch with Daniel Morales, and talked about everything except the Rojas family. But something had changed. I wasn't trying to earn love anymore. 1 month later, I stood at a cemetery in Sonoma County with Carmen beside me. "Hey, Mama," I whispered. "I know everything now." "I'm not a Rojas," I said softly. "I never was. But I'm your daughter, and that's more than enough." For the first time in my life, I felt peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of truth. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever worked yourself to exhaustion trying to earn love that was never on the table, please remember this. Your worth is not determined by people who refuse to see it. Sometimes walking away is the first step toward walking toward yourself. Until next time, take care of yourselves.